The opulent Blackwood mansion loomed over the sprawling estate, its imposing facade a testament to the wealth and power of the family within. Manicured gardens stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with exotic fountains and perfectly trimmed topiaries. It was a paradise of luxury, but for James Blackwood, it felt more like a gilded cage. James stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his father's study, his piercing blue eyes fixed on the horizon. At 28, he was the heir to the Blackwood empire, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that spanned industries from tech to real estate. But for all his apparent privilege, James felt suffocated by the weight of his family name and the expectations that came with it. James. The sharp voice of Edward Blackwood, his father, cut through the air like a whip. "Are you even listening to me?" James turned, facing the man who had shaped every aspect of his life since birth. Edward Blackwood was an imposing figure, his salt and pepper hair perfectly coiffed, his custom-tailored suit a clear indicator of his wealth and status. But it was his eyes, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of warmth, that truly revealed the man's nature. "Yes, father," James replied, his voice carefully neutral. "You were discussing the merger with Hartley Industries." Edward's eyes narrowed. "And the other matter we discussed? Your future?" James felt his heart rate quicken. He knew exactly what his father was referring to, and it filled him with a sense of dread. "Father, I've told you. I'm not ready for marriage, especially not to someone I barely know." Edward slammed his fist on the mahogany desk, causing the crystal decanter of scotch to rattle ominously. "Damn it, James. This isn't about love or your ridiculous notions of romance. This is about securing our family's future. Marrying Evelyn Hartley isn't just a smart business move, it's necessary for the continued success of our empire." James clenched his fists, struggling to maintain his composure. "And what about my happiness? Doesn't that matter to you at all?" A cold smile played across Edward's lips. "Happiness? You want to talk about happiness? Let me tell you something, son. Happiness is a luxury for those who can afford it, and the only way to afford it is through power and wealth. This marriage will ensure both." As his father's words washed over him, James's mind drifted to the one person who truly made him happy. Laura. Sweet, kind-hearted Laura, with her infectious laugh and warm brown eyes. The thought of her working her shift at the small diner across town, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in the Blackwood mansion, made his heart ache. He had met Laura 6 months ago, during one of his rare escapes from the suffocating world of high society. Dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt, he had slipped into the cozy diner, craving a moment of normalcy. Laura had been his waitress, her genuine smile and easygoing nature instantly captivating him. Over the weeks that followed, he found himself returning to the diner, drawn by her warmth and the way she treated him like a regular person, not the heir to a vast fortune. Their friendship had blossomed into love, stolen moments of happiness that James cherished more than all the wealth his family possessed. But he knew his father would never approve. To Edward Blackwood, Laura was nothing more than a poor, uneducated girl, unworthy of the Blackwood name. "James." Edward's sharp voice snapped him back to the present. "I expect you to do your duty. The engagement party is in 2 weeks. You will propose to Evelyn Hartley, and you will do so with a smile on your face. Is that clear?" James felt a wave of despair wash over him. He wanted to rebel, to stand up to his father and declare his love for Laura. But years of living under Edward's iron-fisted rule had taught him the futility of such actions. His father always got what he wanted, no matter the cost. "Yes, father," James replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Edward nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, go get ready. We have dinner with the Hartleys tonight." As James left the study, his mind raced. He had to see Laura, to warn her about what was happening. He couldn't bear the thought of her finding out about his engagement from anyone else. Across town, in the small, bustling diner where she worked, Laura hummed softly to herself as she refilled coffee cups and chatted with the regulars. At 25, she had a natural grace and beauty that turned heads, but it was her kindness and genuine warmth that truly set her apart. "Order up, Laura," called out Manny, the cook, sliding a plate of steaming pancakes onto the counter. Laura grinned, grabbing the plate. Thanks, Manny. These look great. As she served the pancakes to a beaming elderly couple, her mind drifted to James. Their relationship was a secret, one that filled her with both joy and apprehension. She knew they came from different worlds, but when they were together, none of that seemed to matter. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Laura looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she saw James enter. But the moment their eyes met, she knew something was wrong. His face was pale, his normally confident posture slumped with an invisible weight. "James," she said softly as he approached the counter. "What's wrong?" He glanced around nervously. "Can we talk? Somewhere private?" Laura nodded, concern etched on her face. "My break's in 5 minutes. Meet me out back?" James agreed, then slipped out the back door of the diner. Laura finished serving her tables, her mind racing with possibilities. What could have happened to upset James so much? 5 minutes later, she joined him in the small alley behind the diner. James immediately pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. "James, you're scaring me," Laura said, pulling back to look into his eyes. "Please, tell me what's going on." He took a deep breath, his voice shaky as he spoke. "My father, he's forcing me to get engaged. To Evelyn Hartley. It's a business arrangement, to merge our companies." Laura felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. "Engaged? But, what about us?" James cupped her face in his hands, his eyes filled with anguish. "Laura, I love you. You know that, but my father, he controls everything. If I don't do this, he'll destroy everything and everyone I care about. Including you." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes. "So that's it? We're just over?" "No," James said fiercely. "I'll find a way out of this, I promise. I need time. Please, Laura, don't give up on us." As Laura looked into James's pleading eyes, she felt her heart breaking. She wanted to believe him, to trust that their love could overcome the vast chasm of wealth and status that separated them. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. "I love you, James," she said softly. "But I don't know if I can live like this, always hiding, always afraid." James pulled her close again, his voice muffled against her hair. "I know. I'm so sorry, Laura. You deserve so much better than this." As they stood there in the alley, holding each other tight, neither of them noticed the sleek black car parked across the street. Inside, a man with cold eyes watched them through a telephoto lens, a cruel smile playing across his lips as he snapped picture after picture. Edward Blackwood leaned back in the plush leather seat, his voice ice-cold as he spoke to the driver. "Follow the girl. I want to know everything about her. Her family, her past, her secrets. Leave no stone unturned." As the car pulled away, Edward's mind raced with possibilities. He had underestimated his son's foolishness, but this could be turned to his advantage. A plan began to form in his mind, a plan that would not only secure the merger with Hartley Industries but also teach his son a lesson he would never forget. Little did Edward know that his quest to uncover Laura's past would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of his empire and change all their lives forever. Back in the alley, James and Laura finally parted, their eyes red-rimmed and their hearts heavy. As Laura turned to go back into the diner, James caught her hand. "Wait," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No matter what happens, no matter what you hear or see in the coming weeks, please remember this. I love you, Laura. More than anything in this world. And I will find a way for us to be together." Laura nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As she watched James walk away, disappearing into the bustling city street, she couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change in ways they could never have imagined. Little did they know that the true test of their love was yet to come, and that the secrets of Laura's past were about to explode into their lives with earth-shattering consequences. The weeks that followed were a blur of glittering parties, forced smiles, and stolen moments for James and Laura. As the engagement party drew nearer, James felt the noose of his family's expectations tightening around his neck. Every night, he lay awake, his mind racing with plans to escape the life his father had mapped out for him. Meanwhile, Edward Blackwood's investigation into Laura's past was progressing at a rapid pace. The private investigator he had hired, a man known only as Thompson, was ruthlessly efficient. But as the pieces of Laura's history began to come together, Edward found himself facing a mystery that was far more complex than he had anticipated. "Mr. Blackwood," Thompson said, his voice crackling over the secure phone line. "I've uncovered some unusual information about the girl." Edward leaned forward in his leather chair, his interest piqued. "Go on." Her background checks out on the surface. Laura Martinez, 25 years old, born and raised in a small town upstate. But when I dug deeper, I found inconsistencies. Her birth certificate? It's a forgery, and a damn good one at that. Edward's eyebrows shot up. "A forgery? Are you certain?" "Absolutely," Thompson replied. "And that's not all. I managed to track down her high school records. The Laura Martinez who attended that school? She died in a car accident 10 years ago." A chill ran down Edward's spine. "Who is this girl, Thompson?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's the thing, Mr. Blackwood. I don't know. It's as if she appeared out of thin air 5 years ago. No records, no history, nothing. Whoever she is, she's gone to great lengths to hide her true identity." Edward's mind raced with possibilities. Could this waitress be some sort of con artist, targeting his son for his money? Or was there something even more sinister at play? "Keep digging, Thompson," Edward ordered. "I want to know everything about this girl. And I mean everything." As he hung up the phone, a slow, cruel smile spread across Edward's face. This information changed everything. His plan to humiliate his son and this upstart waitress was about to take a very interesting turn. Across town, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her, Laura was finishing up her shift at the diner. As she hung up her apron, her coworker and friend, Maggie, approached her with a concerned look. "Laura, honey, are you okay?" Maggie asked, her motherly instincts on high alert. "You've seemed distracted lately." Laura forced a smile. "I'm fine, Maggie. Just a lot on my mind, that's all." Maggie wasn't buying it. "Is it that handsome young man of yours? The one who comes in here looking like he stepped out of a magazine?" Laura's smile faltered. She hadn't told anyone about James's true identity or the complexity of their relationship. How could she explain that she had fallen in love with one of the most eligible bachelors in the city, a man whose world was so far removed from her own? "It's complicated," Laura finally said. Maggie patted her hand sympathetically. "Love always is, honey. But remember, you're worth more than being someone's secret. You deserve the world." As Laura left the diner, Maggie's words echoed in her mind. She did deserve more than stolen moments and whispered promises. But her heart belonged to James, and the thought of losing him was almost unbearable. Lost in thought, Laura didn't notice the black SUV that had been parked across the street from the diner. As she walked towards the subway station, the vehicle slowly pulled away from the curb, following her at a discreet distance. Inside the SUV, Thompson spoke into his phone. "She's on the move, Mr. Blackwood. Should I continue surveillance?" Edward's voice came through, cold and determined. "Follow her. I want to know every move she makes, every person she talks to." It's time we found out who Laura Martinez really is. As Laura descended into the subway station, she felt a sudden chill, as if someone was watching her. She glanced over her shoulder, but saw only the usual crowd of commuters. Shaking off the feeling, she boarded the train, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Meanwhile, at the Blackwood mansion, James was enduring another tense dinner with the Hartley family. Evelyn Hartley, his supposed bride-to-be, sat beside him, chattering away about wedding plans and future vacations. James nodded and smiled at appropriate intervals, but his mind was elsewhere. "James, darling," Evelyn's sugary sweet voice cut through his thoughts. "You simply must come with me to Paris next month. Daddy's letting me use the private jet, and I thought we could do some shopping for the wedding." Before James could formulate a response, Edward stepped in smoothly. "What a wonderful idea, Evelyn. James would be delighted to accompany you. Wouldn't you, son?" James met his father's steely gaze, recognizing the threat hidden behind the seemingly innocuous words. "Of course," he managed to say. "It sounds lovely." As the evening wore on, James felt as if he was suffocating. The opulent dining room, with its crystal chandeliers and priceless artwork, seemed to close in around him. He excused himself as soon as it was politely possible, retreating to the relative safety of his room. Once alone, James pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over Laura's number. He wanted desperately to hear her voice, to lose himself in the warmth and simplicity of her love. But he hesitated, knowing that every call, every text, put her at risk of discovery by his father. Instead, he opened his laptop, navigating to a secure email account he had set up for emergencies. His fingers flew over the keys as he typed out a message. Things are moving faster than I anticipated. I'm being pressured to go to Paris next month with E. I can't do this anymore. Meet me tomorrow night at our spot. 9 p.m. I have a plan. All my love, J. As James hit send, he felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. He had been working on a plan to break free from his father's control, to start a new life with Laura far away from the toxic world of high society. It was risky, and there was a good chance they would be caught. But the alternative, a life without Laura, trapped in a loveless marriage, was unthinkable. Little did James know that his father was several steps ahead of him. As Edward sat in his study, sipping a glass of 30-year-old scotch, he reviewed the latest report from Thompson. The private investigator had managed to uncover a small town in the Midwest where a girl matching Laura's description had lived briefly 5 years ago. Edward picked up his phone, his voice cold and precise as he spoke to his most trusted associate. I need you to go to Millbrook, Indiana. Find out everything you can about a girl who lived there 5 years ago. She would have been around 20 at the time. I want to know who she was, where she came from, and most importantly, why she left. As he hung up the phone, Edward's mind raced with possibilities. He had built his empire on being able to read people, to anticipate their moves and manipulate them to his advantage. But this girl, this Laura, was an enigma. And Edward Blackwood did not like enigmas. The next evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Laura made her way to the secluded spot in Central Park where she and James often met. Her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and fear. James's message had been cryptic, but the urgency was clear. As she approached their usual bench, hidden from view by a cluster of weeping willows, she saw James pacing back and forth, his normally impeccable appearance disheveled. James, she called out softly. He whirled around, his face lighting up at the sight of her. In 2 long strides, he closed the distance between them, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Laura, he breathed, burying his face in her hair. God, I've missed you. She melted into his arms, allowing herself a moment of peace before the storm she knew was coming. James, what's going on? Your message, you said you had a plan? He pulled back, his blue eyes intense as they met hers. I do. Laura, I can't do this anymore. The lies, the pretending, the constant fear of being discovered. I want a life with you, a real life. Laura's heart soared at his words, but a nagging doubt tugged at her mind. But your family, your responsibilities. James shook his head vehemently. None of that matters. You're what matters, Laura. You're my family now. He reached into his pocket, pulling out 2 plane tickets. I've been planning this for weeks. These are one-way tickets to Buenos Aires. We leave tomorrow night. I've set up new identities for us, bank accounts, everything we need to start a new life. Laura stared at the tickets, her mind reeling. James, it's crazy. We can't just run away. Why not? James countered, his voice filled with passion. Laura, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. But we'll never have a chance here, not with my father controlling everything. This is our only option. As Laura looked into James's eyes, she saw the desperation, the love, and the hope swirling in their depths. She thought about her life at the diner, the friends she had made, the simple but happy existence she had carved out for herself. But she also thought about the secrets she carried, the past she had been running from for so long. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance at a fresh start, a life where she could truly be herself with the man she loved. Okay, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Let's do it, let's run away together. James's face broke into a radiant smile, and he pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the future stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise. But fate, and Edward Blackwood, had other plans. Across town, in the opulent study of the Blackwood mansion, Edward sat behind his massive desk, a tumbler of scotch in one hand and a manila folder in the other. His eyes scanned the contents of the folder, a mix of surprise and cruel satisfaction playing across his features. Well, Miss Laura Martinez, he murmured to himself. Or should I say, Miss Gabriela Velasquez? You've been a very naughty girl indeed. The folder contained the results of his investigation into Laura's past, and the truth was far more shocking than Edward could have imagined. Laura wasn't just some gold-digging waitress. She was the sole heir to the Velasquez fortune, one of the wealthiest families in South America. 5 years ago, the Velasquez family had been destroyed in a tragic accident, or so the world believed. But the truth, as Edward now knew, was far more sinister. The accident had been no accident at all, but a carefully orchestrated plot to eliminate the entire family and seize control of their vast empire. Gabriela, barely 20 at the time, had somehow survived and gone into hiding, assuming a new identity and disappearing into the anonymity of New York City. But why? And more importantly, who was behind the attack on her family? As Edward dug deeper into the report, a name jumped out at him, causing his blood to run cold. It was a name he knew well, a name that had haunted the darkest corners of the business world for decades: Victor Ramirez. Ramirez was a ruthless businessman, known for his cutthroat tactics and rumored connections to organized crime. He had been the Velasquez family's main rival for years, and after their accident, he had swooped in and taken control of much of their business empire. Edward leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This changed everything. If James married Laura, or rather, Gabriela, it would give the Blackwoods control over not just the Hartley fortune, but potentially the entire Velasquez empire as well. It was an opportunity too good to pass up. But there was a complication. Victor Ramirez was not a man to be trifled with. If he discovered that Gabriela was alive and well, living in New York City, there was no telling what he might do to protect his ill-gotten gains. Edward reached for his phone, his decision made. It was time to force his son's hand and bring this Laura girl under his control. And if Victor Ramirez became a problem, well, Edward Blackwood had dealt with dangerous men before. As he dialed a familiar number, Edward allowed himself a small, cold smile. Soon, very soon, all the pieces would fall into place. And when they did, the Blackwood empire would be unstoppable. Little did Edward know that his actions were about to set in motion a chain of events that would not only threaten his carefully laid plans but also unearth long-buried secrets that would shake the foundations of his own family's legacy. As the sun rose over New York City the next morning, James and Laura were blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over their heads. They went about their day, hearts light with the promise of their impending escape. Laura worked her shift at the diner, smiling and chatting with customers as if it were any other day, while James attended to his final business affairs, carefully covering his tracks. But as the hours ticked by, bringing them closer to their moment of freedom, forces were aligning against them. Edward Blackwood's web of influence was vast, and his reach extended far beyond the glittering world of high society. As Laura left the diner for the last time, her small bag of belongings clutched tightly to her chest, she felt a sudden chill run down her spine. The street, usually bustling with activity, seemed oddly quiet. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw them, 2 men in dark suits, moving towards her with purposeful strides. Her heart racing, Laura turned and ran, her instincts screaming at her to escape. But she had only made it a few steps when a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of her, blocking her path. The last thing she saw before a cloth was pressed over her mouth was a pair of cold, calculating eyes that reminded her terrifyingly of James's father. As Laura's world faded to black, across town, James was frantically trying to reach her. His calls went straight to voicemail, his texts unanswered. A sense of dread settled in the pit of his stomach as he realized something had gone terribly wrong. Little did he know that his beloved Laura was being taken to a place where the truth of her past would finally come to light, and where the future of both the Blackwood and Velasquez empires would be decided in a high-stakes game of power, revenge, and long-buried secrets. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change all their lives forever, and as the sun set over New York City, the first act of this dramatic tale was coming to a close, setting the scene for even more shocking revelations and heart-stopping twists in the chapters to come. The Blackwood mansion loomed ominously in the gathering darkness, its windows glowing with an eerie light. Inside, in a secluded room far from prying eyes, Laura Martinez, or rather, Gabriela Velasquez, slowly regained consciousness. Her head throbbed, and for a moment, she struggled to remember where she was or how she had gotten there. As her vision cleared, she found herself face to face with Edward Blackwood. The older man sat across from her, his steely gaze fixed on her face, a tumbler of scotch held loosely in one hand. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Miss Velasquez," Edward sighed, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "Or do you prefer Laura? I must say, you've led us on quite a merry chase." Gabriela's blood ran cold. They knew, somehow, they had discovered her true identity. Years of carefully constructed lies and misdirection crumbled around her in an instant. "How?" she began, her voice hoarse. Edward's lips curled into a cruel smile. "How did I find out? My dear, when you play in the big leagues, you should expect your opponents to do their homework. Though I must admit, you had us fooled for quite some time." A waitress. How quaint. Gabriela straightened in her chair, drawing on a reserve of strength she hadn't known she possessed. "What do you want from me, Mr. Blackwood?" Edward leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a predatory light. "What I want, my dear Gabriela, is very simple. I want you to marry my son." Of all the things Gabriela had expected him to say, this was not one of them. She blinked in confusion. "But, I thought you disapproved of me. Of us." Edward waved his hand dismissively. "That was before I knew who you really were. The sole heir to the Velasquez fortune. Now that's a match worthy of the Blackwood name." Gabriela's mind raced. She had spent years hiding from her past, from the tragedy that had befallen her family. And now, this man, this cold, calculating man who reminded her so much of the people who had destroyed her life, wanted to use her for his own gain. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Edward's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My dear, I don't think you understand your position. You see, I know everything. About the accident that killed your family, about Victor Ramirez's involvement, about your years in hiding. If this information were to fall into the wrong hands, well, I fear your life expectancy would be drastically reduced." Gabriela felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. Victor Ramirez, the name sent shivers down her spine. The man responsible for her family's destruction, the reason she had been forced to live a lie for so long. You would tell him where I am?" she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. Edward shrugged nonchalantly. "Business is business, my dear. I prefer to have you as an ally, but if you prove incooperative, well, I'm sure Mr. Ramirez would be very interested in your whereabouts." As the full weight of her situation settled on her shoulders, Gabriela felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She thought of James, of the future they had planned together. How could she agree to this farce of a marriage, knowing it was built on lies and manipulation? But then another thought struck her. James. If she refused, if she ran, Edward would surely take his anger out on his son. She couldn't bear the thought of James suffering because of her. I need time to think," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward nodded, rising from his chair. "Of course. You have until tomorrow evening to make your decision. Choose wisely, Gabriela. Your future, and the future of those you love, depends on it." As Edward left the room, locking the door behind him, Gabriela finally allowed her tears to fall. How had it all gone so wrong? And where was James? Did he know what his father had done? Meanwhile, across the city, James Blackwood was frantic. He had searched every place he could think of, called every contact he had, but there was no sign of Laura. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, As he paced the floor of his apartment, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. His heart leapt, hoping it was news of Laura, but instead, he saw his father's name on the screen. "Come home immediately. Family emergency." James felt a chill run down his spine. Something was terribly wrong, and he had a sinking feeling that it had everything to do with Laura's disappearance. Without wasting another moment, he grabbed his keys and rushed out the door. As he sped through the city streets towards the Blackwood mansion, his mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Little did he know that the truth waiting for him at home would shake the very foundations of his world. Back at the mansion, Edward Blackwood sat in his study, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. Everything was falling into place. Soon, he would have control not just of the Hartley fortune, but of the vast Velasquez empire as well. And James? Well, James would learn the importance of family loyalty, one way or another. But as Edward savored his impending victory, he failed to notice the shadow that fell across his window, a shadow that belonged to a figure watching the mansion with cold, calculating eyes. Victor Ramirez had not survived in the cutthroat world of international business by being careless. He had informants everywhere, and the moment Edward Blackwood had started digging into the Velasquez family's past, Ramirez had been alerted. Now, as he watched the Blackwood mansion from the safety of his car, Ramirez's mind worked furiously. If Gabriela Velasquez was indeed alive, it changed everything. The empire he had built on the ashes of the Velasquez family was suddenly at risk. He reached for his phone, dialing a familiar number. "It's me," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I need you to get me everything you can on Edward Blackwood. And I mean everything. It's time we reminded the world why no one crosses Victor Ramirez and lives to tell the tale." As he hung up the phone, Ramirez's eyes narrowed. A storm was coming, and when it broke, it would change the lives of everyone involved forever. Inside the mansion, oblivious to the new threat looming on the horizon, Gabriela sat alone in her locked room, her mind a whirlwind of emotions and memories. She thought back to that fateful night 5 years ago, the night her world had shattered into a million pieces. The Velasquez family had been celebrating her father's birthday at their sprawling estate in Argentina. The party had been in full swing, the air filled with laughter and music, when suddenly, everything had gone wrong. The explosions had ripped through the night, turning the joyous celebration into a scene of chaos and terror. Gabriela had been in the gardens, seeking a moment of quiet, when the first blast hit. She had watched in horror as flames engulfed the main house, trapping her family inside. In the confusion that followed, she had managed to escape, helped by a loyal family servant who had smuggled her out of the country. It was only later, as she huddled in a small apartment in New York, that she learned the full extent of the tragedy. Her entire family, parents, siblings, cousins, all gone in one horrific night. The official story had been an accident, a gas leak that had led to the explosions. But Gabriela knew better. She had overheard enough of her father's worried conversations in the weeks leading up to the tragedy to know that Victor Ramirez had been behind it all. Ramirez had coveted the Velasquez empire for years, and when legal means had failed to get him what he wanted, he had resorted to more permanent solutions. Gabriela had spent the past 5 years living in fear, always looking over her shoulder, never staying in one place for too long. But then she had met James, and for the first time since that terrible night, she had allowed herself to hope for a future, to dream of happiness. And now, it was all crumbling around her once again. As she sat there, tears streaming down her face, Gabriela made a decision. She couldn't run anymore. It was time to face her past, to reclaim her identity and her birthright. And perhaps, just perhaps, find a way to be with James without the web of lies that had entangled them both. But first, she needed to find a way out of this room, and out of Edward Blackwood's clutches. As if in answer to her thoughts, she heard a soft scratching at the door. Her heart leapt into her throat. Was it Edward, coming to demand her answer? Or worse, had Ramirez somehow found her? The door swung open, and Gabriela found herself face to face with the last person she expected to see. "Maggie?" she gasped, recognizing her friend and co-worker from the diner. The older woman stood in the doorway, a set of keys in one hand and a determined look on her face. "Come on, honey," Maggie said, her voice urgent. "We don't have much time." Gabriella stared at her in confusion. How did you find me? How did you get in here?" Maggie's face softened with a sad smile. "Oh, sweetie, did you really think I was just a simple waitress? Your father sent me to watch over you, to keep you safe. I've been guarding you all these years, waiting for the right moment." The revelation hit Gabriella like a physical blow. Maggie, kind, motherly Maggie, had known who she was all along. Had been protecting her? "But, why didn't you tell me?" Gabriella asked, her voice trembling. "To keep you safe," Maggie replied, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "The less you knew, the safer you were. But now it's time for you to reclaim your heritage, Gabriella. Your father left contingencies in place, resources that Ramirez never found. It's time to use them." Gabriella's mind reeled with this new information. All this time, she had thought she was alone, and yet, she had been protected, watched over by this woman who had become like a second mother to her. "What about James?" Gabriella asked, suddenly remembering the man she loved. Maggie's expression turned grim. "James is on his way here now. His father sent for him. We need to get you out before he arrives. It's not safe for either of you here." Gabriella hesitated for a moment. The thought of leaving without seeing James, without explaining everything to him, tore at her heart. But she knew Maggie was right. Edward Blackwood was too dangerous, and with Victor Ramirez potentially in the picture, every moment they stayed put them all at risk. "Okay," Gabriella said, taking a deep breath. "Let's go." As they slipped out of the room and made their way through the shadowy corridors of the Blackwood mansion, Gabriella's mind raced. She had spent so long running from her past, and now, it seemed, she was running towards it. What resources had her father left for her? And more importantly, would they be enough to take on both Edward Blackwood and Victor Ramirez? As they reached a side entrance, Maggie pressed a small, nondescript phone into Gabriella's hand. "Everything you need is on here," she whispered. "Contacts, account numbers, safe house locations. Your father made sure you would have the means to fight back when the time came." Gabriella clutched the phone tightly, feeling as if she were holding her entire future in her hand. "What about you?" she asked Maggie. "Aren't you coming with me?" Maggie shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "No, honey. My job was to keep you safe until you were ready. Now, it's your turn to take control. But don't worry, we'll see each other again. When this is all over." With tears in her eyes, Gabriella hugged Maggie fiercely. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." As Gabriella slipped out into the night, her heart heavy but her resolve strengthened, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The time for hiding was over. Now, it was time to fight. Little did she know that at that very moment, James was pulling up to the mansion, his heart racing with fear and anticipation. As he rushed inside, calling out for Laura, he had no idea that he had just missed her by mere minutes. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. Gabriella Velasquez was ready to reclaim her identity and her birthright. James Blackwood was about to discover the shocking truth about the woman he loved. Edward Blackwood's carefully laid plans were on the verge of unraveling. And in the shadows, Victor Ramirez waited, ready to strike at the first sign of weakness. As the night deepened, the pieces were moving into place for a showdown that would shake the foundations of their world and test the strength of true love in the face of betrayal, greed, and long-buried secrets. The story of the millionaire's son and the mysterious waitress was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. James Blackwood burst through the doors of his family's mansion, his heart pounding in his chest. The usually bustling house was eerily quiet, adding to the sense of foreboding that had been growing in him since he received his father's cryptic message. "Father," he called out, his voice echoing through the cavernous foyer. "Laura?" The sound of footsteps drew his attention, and he turned to see Edward Blackwood descending the grand staircase, a glass of scotch in hand and a smug smile on his face. "Ah, James. So good of you to join us," Edward sighed, his voice dripping with false warmth. James felt his anger rising. "Where is she, father? What have you done with Laura? Edward's smile widened, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Laura? Oh, you mean Gabriela Velasquez, heir to the Velasquez fortune? I'm afraid she's no longer with us. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as James struggled to process his father's words. Gabriela Velasquez? What are you talking about? Where is Laura? Edward gestured dismissively. Your little waitress girlfriend has been playing us all for fools, my boy. She's not some simple girl from a small town. She's the sole surviving member of one of the wealthiest families in South America. As Edward began to explain the truth about Laura's, or rather, Gabriela's, past, James felt as if the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. The woman he loved, the future he had planned, it had all been built on a lie. No, James said, shaking his head in disbelief. You're lying. Laura would never. Open your eyes, James. Edward snapped, his facade of calm cracking for a moment. She used you to hide from her past, to escape those who would do her harm. And now, thanks to my intervention, we have the opportunity to merge the Blackwood and Velasquez empires. Do you have any idea of the power that would give us? James stared at his father, revulsion growing in the pit of his stomach. Is that all you care about? Power? What about love, father? What about happiness? Edward's laugh was cold and mirthless. Love? Happiness? Those are luxuries for the weak, James. In our world, power is the only currency that matters. As father and son faced off, neither noticed the figure watching from the shadows. Victor Ramirez had managed to infiltrate the Blackwood mansion, his years of experience in the underworld serving him well. As he listened to the heated exchange, a cruel smile played across his lips. So, the Velasquez girl was alive after all. And not only that, but she had managed to entangle herself with the Blackwood heir. It was almost too perfect. Ramirez's mind raced with possibilities. With the right leverage, he could not only eliminate the last remaining threat to his control of the Velasquez assets but also gain a foothold in the Blackwood Empire. As he slipped away, already formulating his plan, the confrontation between James and Edward reached a boiling point. I won't be a part of this, father, James declared, his voice shaking with anger and hurt. I love Laura, or Gabriela, or whatever her name is. And I won't let you use her for your sick games. Edward's face darkened with rage. You fool, do you think you have a choice? Do you think you can walk away from this family, from your responsibilities? Watch me, James spat, turning on his heel and storming out of the mansion. As the door slammed behind him, Edward's mask of control finally slipped. With a roar of frustration, he hurled his glass against the wall, watching as it shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. Meanwhile, across the city, Gabriela Velasquez was coming to terms with her new reality. The small, nondescript phone Maggie had given her was a portal to a world she had left behind years ago. As she scrolled through the information, bank account numbers with balances that made her head spin, contact details for loyal family retainers scattered across the globe, and most intriguingly, files labeled, contingency plans, Gabriela felt a mix of emotions washing over her. Grief for the family she had lost, anger at the injustice that had been done to them, fear of the powerful enemies arrayed against her, but also, buried beneath it all, a spark of hope. For the first time in years, she had the resources to fight back, to reclaim what was rightfully hers. But as she sat in the small, dingy motel room she had checked into under a false name, Gabriela's thoughts kept returning to James. The pain and betrayal he must be feeling tore at her heart. She had never meant to deceive him, had never planned to fall in love. But now, the web of lies and half-truths threatened to destroy the one good thing in her life. With trembling fingers, she dialed James's number, praying he would answer, that he would give her a chance to explain. Across town, James was driving aimlessly through the city streets, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, when his phone began to ring. His heart leapt when he saw the name on the screen, Laura. For a moment, his finger hovered over the reject button. But despite everything, despite the hurt and the betrayal, he couldn't bring himself to shut her out completely. Laura, he answered, his voice hoarse. Or should I call you Gabriela? On the other end of the line, Gabriella felt tears welling up in her eyes at the pain in James's voice. "James, please," she pleaded. "I know I've hurt you, and I'm so sorry. But please, let me explain. There's so much you don't know." James was silent for a long moment, warring with himself. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where are you?" Gabriella gave him the address of the motel, her heart racing. "James, be careful," she added. "Your father, he's more dangerous than you know. And he's not the only one we need to worry about." As James made his way to the motel, neither he nor Gabriella realized that they were being watched. Victor Ramirez's men had been tracking both of them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In his luxurious penthouse suite, Ramirez reviewed the reports from his operatives. Everything was falling into place. Soon, he would have both the Velasquez girl and the Blackwood heir in his grasp. And then, he would finally have the leverage he needed to bring both families to their knees. Back at the Blackwood mansion, Edward was not idle. His initial rage had cooled, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. He would not let his son's foolish notions of love ruin years of careful planning. With a few quick phone calls, he set his own plan in motion. If James wouldn't see reason, if he insisted on choosing this girl over his family, then Edward would make sure they both paid the price. As night fell over the city, the various players in this high-stakes game moved into position. James, driving towards what he hoped would be answers and reconciliation. Gabriella, waiting anxiously in her motel room, praying for a chance to make things right. Edward Blackwood, orchestrating his schemes from his palatial study. And Victor Ramirez, the dark horse, ready to upset the entire board for his own gain. Little did any of them know that their carefully laid plans were about to collide in a way that would change all their lives forever. As James pulled up to the rundown motel, his headlights illuminated a figure standing in the shadows. A figure that was decidedly not Gabriella. Before he could react, his car door was wrenched open, and he felt the cold press of a gun barrel against his temple. "Mr. Blackwood," a gruff voice said. "Mr. Ramirez would like a word with you." In her motel room, Gabriella paced anxiously, checking her phone every few seconds. James should have arrived by now. What was taking him so long? A soft knock at the door made her freeze. "James?" she called out hesitantly. But the voice that answered sent a chill down her spine. "Not quite, Miss Velasquez," Edward Blackwood said smoothly. "I think it's time you and I had a little chat about the future of our families." As Gabriella backed away from the door, her mind racing for a way out, she realized with growing horror that she had walked right into a trap. And somewhere out in the night, James was heading towards a danger he couldn't possibly anticipate. The stage was set for a confrontation that would bring long-buried secrets to light, test the bonds of love and loyalty, and determine the fate of two of the most powerful families in the world. As the clock struck midnight, the city held its breath, unaware of the drama unfolding in its midst. A drama of love, betrayal, and revenge that would soon explode into the headlines and change the landscape of power forever. In a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Victor Ramirez waited, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Soon, he would have all the pieces he needed to complete his revenge, the revenge he had been planning for over 5 years. Little did any of them know that there was another player in this dangerous game, one who had been watching from the shadows, biding their time. As the various factions converged, this unknown entity prepared to make their move. A move that would shatter alliances, reveal shocking truths, and rewrite the rules of the game entirely. The night was far from over, and the most shocking revelations were yet to come. For in the world of power and privilege, nothing is ever as it seems, and even the deepest secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface. As dawn approached, the city remained oblivious to the storm brewing in its midst. A storm that would soon break with earth-shattering consequences, forever altering the lives of all involved and revealing that in the high-stakes world of love and power, the greatest danger often comes from where you least expect it. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to paint the sky when a sleek black car pulled up to the abandoned warehouse where Victor Ramirez waited. Two burly men dragged a struggling James Blackwood from the backseat, his hands bound behind his back and a look of fury in his eyes. "Ah, young Mr. Blackwood," Ramirez said, his voice silky smooth as he approached. "So good of you to join us. I do apologize for the rough treatment, but I find it so much easier to have a civilized conversation when one's guests are, shall we say, properly restrained?" James glared at the man before him, instantly recognizing him from the business magazines and newspaper articles he'd seen over the years. "Victor Ramirez," he spat. "What do you want from me?" Ramirez's smile was cold and predatory. "It's not about what I want from you, my boy. It's about what you're going to do for me. Or rather, what your lovely Gabriella is going to do when she learns I have you." As the implications of Ramirez's words sank in, James felt a chill run down his spine. This man, this monster who had destroyed Gabriella's family, was now using him as bait to lure her into a trap. "She'll never fall for it," James said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Gabriella's too smart for that." Ramirez's laugh was like ice water down James's back. "Oh, I think you underestimate the power of love, Mr. Blackwood. Gabriella Velasquez has spent the last 5 years running and hiding. But for you, I think she'll come running straight into my arms." As Ramirez turned away to confer with his men, James's mind raced. He had to find a way to warn Gabriella, to keep her safe from this madman. But how? Meanwhile, across town in the rundown motel, Gabriella found herself in an equally precarious situation. Edward Blackwood stood before her, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Miss Velasquez," Edward sighed, his voice dripping with false courtesy. Or should I say, the elusive Gabriella Velasquez, sole heir to the Velasquez fortune. "You've led us all on quite a merry chase, my dear." Gabriella straightened her spine, calling on every ounce of the strength and dignity that had been instilled in her since childhood. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I assume you're not here for a friendly chat." Edward's smile was razor sharp. "Oh, but I am, my dear. I'm here to discuss our future. The future of the Blackwood and Velasquez empires, united as one. With you as my daughter-in-law, of course." Gabriella's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious. After everything you've done, you expect me to just agree to marry James and hand over my family's legacy to you?" "Oh, I'm deadly serious," Edward replied, all pretense of civility dropping away. "You see, my dear, you don't have much of a choice. Your precious James is currently in the hands of Victor Ramirez. And his continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation." The blood drained from Gabriella's face. You're working with Ramirez? The man who murdered my family?" Edward waved his hand dismissively. "Business makes for strange bedfellows, my dear. Ramirez and I have come to an understanding. He gets his revenge, I get the merger of the century, and you? You get to save the man you love. Everybody wins." As Gabriella's mind reeled from this new betrayal, a small part of her couldn't help but admire the audacity of Edward's plan. He had managed to outmaneuver them all, playing every side against the middle. But Gabriella Velasquez hadn't survived 5 years on the run by giving up easily. Her mind raced, searching for a way out of this impossible situation. And then, like a light bulb going off in her head, she remembered the phone Maggie had given her, the phone that held the key to her family's contingency plans. "I need time to think," Gabriella said, forcing her voice to sound defeated. It's too much to process all at once." Edward nodded, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "Of course, my dear. Take all the time you need. But remember, James's life hangs in the balance. Don't take too long to make your decision." As Edward left the motel room, confident in his victory, Gabriella's fingers flew over the keys of the hidden phone. If her father's plans were as thorough as she hoped, there might just be a way out of this nightmare. Across the city, in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the skyline, a figure stood silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Magdalena Cortez, former head of security for the Velasquez family, watched the city below, her face etched with worry. The secure phone in her hand buzzed with an incoming message. As she read Gabriella's desperate plea for help, Magdalena's expression hardened with determination. It was time to implement the final phase of Antonio Velasquez's grand plan, A plan 5 years in the making. With quick, efficient movements, Magdalena began to make calls. Sleeper agents, strategically placed in key positions over the years, were activated. Bank accounts were unfrozen, and carefully gathered evidence was prepared for release. The storm that had been brewing for 5 long years was about to break, and when it did, it would reshape the landscape of power in ways that neither Edward Blackwood nor Victor Ramirez could possibly imagine. As the pieces of Antonio Velasquez's posthumous chess game began to move into place, the various players in this high-stakes drama found themselves on a collision course with destiny. In the warehouse, James Blackwood was working furiously to free himself from his bonds. Years of sailing and rock climbing had given him strong, dexterous hands, and bit by bit, he could feel the ropes beginning to loosen. Victor Ramirez paced impatiently, checking his watch every few minutes. "Where is she?" he muttered. "She should have contacted us by now." One of his men approached cautiously. "Boss, there's something you need to see," he said, holding out a tablet. Ramirez snatched the device, his eyes widening as he read the breaking news headline. "Shocking evidence reveals corporate conspiracy. Velasquez family murder plot exposed." "No," Ramirez whispered, his face paling. "No, this is impossible." As he frantically scrolled through the article, James managed to work one hand free. Hope surged through him. Maybe, just maybe, he could turn the tables on his captor. Meanwhile, back at the motel, Gabriella was putting the final touches on her own plan. With trembling hands, she dialed a number she had memorized years ago but never thought she'd have the courage to use. "This is Gabriella Velasquez," she said when the call was answered. "Authorization code. Phoenix Rising. It's time to bring them all down." Across the city, in boardrooms and newsrooms, on trading floors and in government offices, the carefully planted seeds of Antonio Velasquez's revenge began to bear fruit. Evidence of corporate espionage, money laundering, and murder for hire flooded the media. The stock prices of companies associated with both the Blackwood empire and Ramirez's conglomerate went into freefall. Edward Blackwood was in the middle of a board meeting when his phone exploded with alerts. As he read the cascade of devastating news, he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Everything he had built, every carefully laid plan, was crumbling before his eyes. In a fit of desperation, he dialed Victor Ramirez's number. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted when Ramirez answered. "This wasn't part of the plan." "Don't talk to me about plans, Blackwood," Ramirez snarled. "Your incompetence has ruined everything. If you think I'm going down alone, you're sorely mistaken." As the two titans of industry turned on each other, hurling accusations and threats, neither noticed the small army of federal agents converging on their respective locations. Back at the warehouse, James had managed to free himself completely. Taking advantage of the chaos and confusion caused by the breaking news, he made his move. With a swift, decisive motion, he disarmed the nearest guard and turned the tables on his captors. "It's over, Ramirez," James said, his voice steady as he held the gun trained on the older man. "Your empire is falling as we speak. It's time to face justice for what you did to the Velasquez family." Ramirez's face contorted with rage. "You fool," he spat. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. The Velasquez girl is as guilty as the rest of us. Her father was no saint." Before James could respond, the warehouse doors burst open. A team of heavily armed federal agents poured in, led by none other than Magdalena Cortez. "Victor Ramirez," Magdalena said, her voice ringing with authority. "You're under arrest for the murder of Antonio Velasquez and his family, as well as a host of other charges I'm sure you'll find most interesting." As Ramirez was led away in handcuffs, ranting and raving about conspiracies and betrayals, James felt a wave of relief wash over him. But it was short-lived as he remembered Gabriella. Was she safe? Had she managed to escape Edward Blackwood? His questions were answered moments later when Gabriella herself walked through the warehouse doors, flanked by another team of agents. The moment their eyes met, the world seemed to fall away. "James," Gabriella breathed, running towards him. They collided in a fierce embrace, holding onto each other as if their lives depended on it. "I'm so sorry," Gabriella sobbed into his chest. "I never meant to lie to you." I never meant for any of this to happen. James pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. Hey, look at me, he said softly. I love you, the real you. Gabriela Velasquez, Laura Martinez. Whatever name you go by, you're the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. As they shared a passionate kiss, Magdalena approached, a small smile on her usually stern face. I hate to interrupt, she said, but we have a lot to discuss. Gabriela, it's time you learned the full extent of your father's plan. Over the next few hours, as dawn broke over the city and the news of the century dominated every headline, Gabriela and James learned the truth about Antonio Velasquez's grand design. The murder of the Velasquez family had been a carefully orchestrated deception. Antonio had discovered the plot against him months in advance and had set in motion a plan of breathtaking scope and complexity. The explosion that supposedly killed the family had been a ruse, designed to give Gabriela a clean escape and allow Antonio to work from the shadows. For 5 long years, he had gathered evidence, moved assets, and positioned his pieces on the board. Magdalena, in her role as Maggie the waitress, had been Gabriela's guardian and the linchpin of the entire operation. The seemingly chance meeting between Gabriela and James had been part of the plan all along, a way to bring the Blackwood empire into the web of justice Antonio had woven. Your father knew that Edward Blackwood was as corrupt as Ramirez, Magdalena explained. He wanted to bring them both down, to cleanse the business world of their poison. And he knew that true love, the love between you and James, would be the key to unraveling their schemes. As Gabriela and James absorbed this revelation, they realized that their love story had been part of something far greater than themselves. It was a tale of justice, of good triumphing over evil, of love conquering all. In the days that followed, as the dust began to settle and the full extent of the Velasquez-Blackwood-Ramirez scandal became clear, Gabriela and James found themselves at the center of a media storm. Edward Blackwood, along with Victor Ramirez and their various co-conspirators, faced a laundry list of charges. The Blackwood and Ramirez empires crumbled, their assets frozen and their reputations in tatters. But from the ashes of these corrupt dynasties, something new and hopeful began to emerge. Gabriela, with James by her side, took control of what remained of both the Velasquez and Blackwood holdings. Together, they vowed to rebuild, to create a business empire founded on ethics and integrity. As they stood together on the balcony of the Velasquez family's restored mansion, overlooking the city they would help reshape, Gabriela turned to James with tears in her eyes. I can't believe we're here, she said softly. After everything we've been through, all the lies and betrayals, we made it. James pulled her close, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. We did more than make it, he said. We triumphed. And we did it together. As the sun set on this chapter of their lives, casting a golden glow over the city, Gabriela and James knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. They had faced down corruption, overcome betrayal, and emerged stronger for it. Their love story, born in secrecy and tested by fire, had become a beacon of hope for a city, and a world, in need of heroes. And as they sealed their triumph with a kiss, they knew that together, they could face anything the future might hold. But even as they celebrated their victory and looked forward to their future together, neither Gabriela nor James could shake the feeling that their story was far from over. For in the world of power and privilege, every ending is just a new beginning, and the game of love, betrayal, and redemption is never truly finished. As night fell over the city, the stage was set for the next chapter in this epic tale of love, power, and revenge. For Gabriela and James, the greatest challenges, and the most rewarding triumphs, were yet to come. 6 months had passed since the explosive revelation of the Velasquez-Blackwood-Ramirez scandal had rocked the business world to its core. The dust was beginning to settle, but for Gabriela Velasquez and James Blackwood, the journey was far from over. The sprawling Velasquez mansion, once a symbol of opulence and power, had been transformed into the headquarters of the newly formed Velasquez-Blackwood Foundation. Its marble halls, once echoing with the whispers of corporate conspiracies, now bustled with the energy of young entrepreneurs and social activists working to reshape the city's future. Gabriela stood at the window of what had once been her father's study, gazing out at the meticulously manicured gardens. She couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed in such a short time. The weight of her family's legacy, once a burden she had run from, now rested comfortably on her shoulders. A gentle knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. "Come in," she called, smiling as James entered the room. "Hey, beautiful," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and planting a soft kiss on her neck. "Ready for the big meeting?" Gabriella leaned back into his embrace, drawing strength from his presence. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied. "I still can't believe we're doing this." This, she referred to as the Velasquez Blackwood Foundation's most ambitious project yet. A comprehensive plan to revitalize the city's most neglected neighborhoods, providing job training, affordable housing, and educational opportunities to those who needed it most. It was a far cry from the cutthroat world of corporate takeovers and backroom deals that had defined both their families for generations. But for Gabriella and James, it was a chance to redefine their legacies, to use their resources and influence for the greater good. As they made their way to the conference room, hand in hand, neither of them could have anticipated the challenges that lay ahead. Challenges that would test their love, their resolve, and the very foundations of the new life they were building together. The conference room was packed with a diverse group of stakeholders, community leaders, city officials, and potential investors. As Gabriella and James took their places at the head of the table, a hush fell over the room. "Thank you all for coming," Gabriella began, her voice steady and confident. "Today, we're not just presenting a business plan. We're proposing a new vision for our city, a vision of equality, opportunity, and sustainable growth." As she launched into the presentation, outlining the foundation's ambitious goals and strategies, James couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was the real Gabriella, passionate, brilliant, and determined to make a difference. It was the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. But even as Gabriella's words sparked excitement and hope among the attendees, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Unbeknownst to the young couple, forces were aligning against them, threatened by their vision of a more equitable future. In a dimly lit bar across town, a group of men huddled around a corner table, their faces etched with bitterness and resentment. These were the remnants of the old guard, former executives and partners in the Blackwood and Ramirez empires who had managed to escape prosecution but had lost everything in the scandal's aftermath. "Look at them," spat one man, gesturing to the TV where Gabriella and James were being interviewed about their foundation's plans. "Playing at being saviors of the city. They have no idea what's coming." The man at the head of the table, his once expensive suit now shabby and worn, leaned forward. Those around him fell silent, recognizing the dangerous glint in his eye. This was Maxwell Worthington, former CFO of Blackwood Enterprises and Edward Blackwood's right-hand man. "Gentlemen," Worthington said, his voice low and menacing, "I think it's time we reminded the Velasquez girl and young Blackwood that actions have consequences. They took everything from us. It's only fair we return the favor." As the group began to plot their revenge, neither Gabriella nor James had any inkling of the storm that was brewing. They were too focused on their plans for the future, too caught up in the whirlwind of their love and shared purpose. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, even to those who think they've overcome the worst. A few weeks after the foundation's big presentation, Gabriella found herself alone in the mansion, poring over financial reports. James was out of town, meeting with potential partners for their affordable housing initiative. As she worked late into the night, a noise from downstairs caught her attention. At first, she dismissed it as the old house settling, but then she heard it again, the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Her heart racing, Gabriella reached for her phone, only to find it dead. She cursed silently, remembering she had forgotten to charge it earlier. The landline in the study was her next best option, but to reach it, she'd have to venture out into the hallway. Taking a deep breath, Gabriella steeled herself and crept towards the door. But as she reached for the handle, it suddenly burst open, revealing a masked figure wielding a gun. "Hello, Miss Velasquez," the intruder said, his voice muffled but dripping with malice. "I believe it's time you and I had a little chat about the future of your precious foundation." Gabriella's mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. But as two more masked men entered the room, she realized with a sinking heart that this was no random break-in. This was a carefully orchestrated attack, aimed at the very heart of everything she and James had built. As the intruders began to outline their demands, the dissolution of the foundation, the transfer of its assets to unnamed offshore accounts, Gabriella felt a familiar fire igniting within her. She had not come this far, had not survived years on the run and faced down the likes of Victor Ramirez, to be cowed by these thugs. With a sudden, swift movement, she grabbed a heavy paperweight from her desk and hurled it at the closest attacker. The man stumbled, his gun clattering to the floor. In the moment of confusion that followed, Gabriella made a break for it, racing down the hallway towards the mansion's panic room, a remnant of her father's paranoia that she had never been more grateful for. Heart pounding, she could hear the men in pursuit, their angry shouts echoing through the cavernous house. Just a few more steps. She burst into the secure room, slamming the reinforced door shut behind her. As the locks engaged, Gabriella allowed herself a moment of relief before turning to the control panel. Within moments, she had activated the mansion's state-of-the-art security system and alerted the authorities. As sirens wailed in the distance, growing steadily closer, Gabriella sank to the floor, her mind whirling. Who were these men? What did they want? And most importantly, how had they known about the Foundation's confidential plans? As the police arrived and the would-be kidnappers were apprehended, Gabriella couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger threat. Someone out there wanted to destroy everything she and James had worked for, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to do it. Across the country, James Blackwood was jolted awake by the incessant ringing of his phone. When he saw Gabriella's name on the screen, a smile spread across his face, only to be quickly replaced by a look of horror as she recounted the night's events. "I'm coming home," he said, already throwing clothes into a suitcase. "Gabriella, I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have." "James, stop," Gabriella interrupted, her voice stronger now. "This isn't your fault. But we need to face facts. Someone is targeting us, targeting the Foundation. And I have a feeling this is just the opening salvo." As James rushed to catch the first flight back to the city, neither he nor Gabriella could have imagined the web of deceit and betrayal they were about to uncover. A web that would reach back into their families' pasts and threaten not just their work, but their very lives. In the coming weeks, as the investigation into the break-in unfolded, startling truths began to emerge. The attackers, it turned out, were not just common criminals, but former employees of both Blackwood Enterprises and the Ramirez conglomerate. And they had not been working alone. A trail of evidence led back to Maxwell Worthington and his cabal of disgruntled ex-executives. But as the police closed in on Worthington, another, more disturbing lead emerged, one that pointed to a mole within the Velasquez Blackwood Foundation itself. The realization that someone they trusted, someone close to them, might be working against them shook Gabriella and James to their core. Suddenly, every friendly face seemed suspect, every confidant potentially compromised. As they worked to ferret out the traitor in their midst, Gabriella and James found their relationship tested in ways they never could have anticipated. The stress of constant vigilance, the weight of their responsibilities, and the gnawing fear of betrayal began to take their toll. Arguments became more frequent, tender moments fewer and farther between. The once unshakable bond between them started to show signs of strain. It all came to a head one stormy night, as they pored over financial records, searching for any sign of embezzlement or sabotage. A simple disagreement over strategy escalated quickly, old wounds and new fears bubbling to the surface. "Maybe your father was right about me," Gabriella said, her voice bitter. "Maybe I am just a liability, a target painted on the back of everyone I care about." James recoiled as if he'd been slapped. "How can you say that? After everything we've been through, everything we've built together? Look around, James," Gabriella cried, gesturing wildly. "Our lives are falling apart. The Foundation is under attack. We can't trust anyone. Maybe we were fooling ourselves, thinking we could change things. Maybe we're just not meant for this kind of life." As the words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. A deafening crack of thunder shook the mansion. And in that moment, as they stared at each other across the debris-strewn desk, both Gabriella and James realized they had reached a crossroads. Would they let the pressures of their new life, the echoes of their family's toxic legacies, tear them apart? Or would they find a way to come together, stronger than ever, and face the challenges ahead as a united front? As the storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil in their hearts, Gabriella and James stood on the precipice of a decision that would shape not just their futures, but the future of the city they had sworn to protect and nurture. Little did they know that even as they grappled with their personal demons, the true architect of their troubles was preparing to make their final, devastating move. A shadow from the past, long thought vanquished, was about to re-emerge, bringing with it revelations that would shake the very foundations of everything Gabriella and James thought they knew about their families, their love, and themselves. The stage was set for a final confrontation, one that would determine not just the fate of the Velázquez-Blackwood Foundation, but the very nature of love, loyalty, and redemption in a world where nothing is ever truly as it seems. As the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of a new day, Gabriella and James stood at the window, watching the storm slowly subside. Their argument had left them both drained, but as they stood there in silence, something shifted between them. James reached out, taking Gabriella's hand in his. "We're stronger together," he said softly. "Whatever's coming, whatever challenges we face them as one. I love you, Gabriella Velázquez. No force on earth is going to change that." Gabriella squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his love chase away the chill of fear and doubt. "I love you too, James Blackwood. Always and forever." As they sealed their recommitment with a kiss, neither of them could have known that their greatest test was yet to come. For in the shadows, a figure long thought dead was stirring, ready to unleash a storm that would make the night's tempest seem like a gentle breeze in comparison. The final act of their epic tale was about to begin, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Love, loyalty, and the very fate of their city hung in the balance. But together, Gabriella and James were ready to face whatever came their way, their bond stronger than ever, their resolve unshakable. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, a new chapter in their story was about to unfold, one that would test them to their very limits and reveal once and for all the true power of love in the face of ultimate betrayal.